I swear, it wasn't supposed to feel like that. Not when it was just a couple bags of groceries, a polite smile, and a warm, thank you, drifting from her lips. I'd seen her a few times in the hallway, apartment 4B. Late 40s, maybe mid, if the light was kind. She had that kind of presence you notice without meaning to, like a scent you can't place but keep breathing in. I never asked her name. I thought it might be better that way, safer, somehow. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was heading up the stairs with a pack of ramen under my arm when I found her paused on the second-floor landing, bags dangling from both hands. Her knuckles were pale from gripping the handles. "Need a hand?" I asked. She looked at me like she'd been caught off guard, not by the question, but by me asking it. "These are heavier than I thought," she said with a short laugh, handing one over. Her voice had that low, slightly worn texture, like she'd been talking all morning and only now realized she was tired. I took the bags, trying not to notice the way her fingers brushed mine. Warm. A little unsteady. Her apartment smelled faintly of something citrus and clean. The kind of smell that makes you think she either keeps her life in perfect order, or tries hard to. I set the bags on the counter and stepped back, ready to make an awkward exit. "Wait," she said. I froze in the doorway. Her hand rested against the counter, but her shoulders swayed a little. I thought maybe she'd just lost her balance. Then her knees bent the wrong way and she was falling, toward me. I didn't think, just caught her. My arm wrapped around her back, her head landing against my shoulder. She was light but not weightless, like holding something that could break if you weren't careful. For a second, the only sound was her breathing, shallow, quick. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her fingers curled into my shirt. We stayed like that longer than we should have. Not because she needed to. Because neither of us moved. Her eyes opened slowly, searching my face. There was something there, not gratitude, not embarrassment, something heavier. "I haven't let anyone hold me in years," she said quietly. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. My hand was still against the small of her back, feeling the faint tremor in her muscles. She didn't step away. Then, almost as if remembering herself, she straightened, smoothing her hair. "You should, probably go," she said, but her voice wavered. I nodded, stepping toward the door. My fingers brushed the frame as I passed, and then hers brushed mine. Not an accident this time. She didn't look at me when she said, "Tomorrow, could you help me with something else?" I stopped. And in the quiet, I realized I'd say yes before I even knew what she was asking. She didn't open her door right away the next afternoon. I was halfway through convincing myself she'd changed her mind when the latch clicked and she appeared. This time, she looked softer. Not in the way people mean when they talk about clothes or makeup. She wore the same loose sweater, the same faintly undone bun, but in the way her eyes lingered on me for a beat longer than they should have. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. I glanced around as I set down my backpack. The place looked the same, tidy, with a few stray books on the table, but there was something lived in about the mess today. A blanket draped over the couch, a mug half full of cold tea, an open notebook with words scribbled and crossed out. "I need help moving some boxes," she explained, pointing toward the hallway. Her voice was light, but the faint shadow under her eyes hadn't been there yesterday. As I carried the first box, I caught her watching me from the doorway, not in a bold, obvious way, but like she was studying something she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. "You didn't have to say yes," she said suddenly. I didn't mind. Her lips pressed together. "That's not the same thing." I set the box down a little too quickly. "You don't think I'd want to help?" Her gaze flickered, down, then back up. "I think you're young enough to find better things to do than this." I could have told her she was wrong. I could have told her I'd been thinking about her hand brushing mine since yesterday. But instead, I just asked, "Do you want me to leave?" She hesitated, and in that pause, I saw it, the smallest shift in her posture, like she wanted to say no but couldn't quite give herself permission. "No," she said finally. "I don't." We worked in silence after that. Well, almost silence. There was the sound of cardboard scraping the floor, the faint hum of the fridge, the rhythm of her breathing behind me. I found myself memorizing details I had no right to, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when it fell loose, the way her sweater slipped slightly off one shoulder as she bent to open a box. When I finished the last one, she was leaning against the wall, arms folded. "You always this quiet?" "Only when I'm trying not to say the wrong thing." Her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And what would that be?" I almost told her. I almost let the word spill, that she'd been in my head all night, that I'd caught myself wondering how her skin would feel if I traced my fingers along her wrist. But instead, she stepped closer, her hand brushing my arm as if by accident, only it wasn't. "Stay a little longer," she said. And suddenly, the air in the room felt heavier. I stayed. I told myself it was just for a coffee, just for a few minutes. But when she set the mug in front of me and sat across the table, elbows on the wood, it didn't feel casual anymore. Her sweater sleeves were pushed to her forearms now, revealing a thin, almost faded scar on the inside of her wrist. My eyes lingered before I could stop myself. She noticed. "It's old," she said softly, rubbing at it. "From when I thought I could fix things by forcing them." I wanted to ask what things meant, but the way she looked down at her hands told me she didn't want the whole story out loud. Instead, I said, "Looks like it healed." "Not everything does," she murmured. Silence stretched between us, the kind that doesn't feel empty but full, of what, I couldn't say. I sipped the coffee, though it was too hot, letting it burn the inside of my mouth just to keep from saying something reckless. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, jaw tightening, before flipping it face down. "Everything okay?" "Just someone who used to think they knew me." Her voice was sharper than before, but her eyes softened when they met mine. It was that look, the one that makes you feel like you've been let into a room nobody else gets to see, that made me forget whatever line I'd been trying to hold. When she reached for the sugar bowl, her fingers brushed mine again. This time, they stayed there a moment too long. The knock at the door made us both jerk back. She stood, smoothing her hair, and opened it just enough to speak to whoever was outside. A man's voice, too low for me to catch the words, but her answers were clipped, polite, and quick. When she closed the door, she let out a breath she must have been holding. "Friend?" I asked. "Not really." She didn't explain, and I didn't push. But I noticed the way her shoulders relaxed when she sat back down across from me, like I was a safer place to land than whoever had just been at that door. I told myself I should go. This was too much, too close. But when I stood, she reached out and caught my wrist lightly. "You don't have to leave yet." Her thumb brushed my skin, slow, deliberate, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. We were too close now, both leaning slightly forward over the table, both caught in something neither of us wanted to name. And I couldn't tell if I was about to step away, or if we were about to fall in. The next time I saw her was 2 days later. I hadn't planned to knock. I was just passing her door when it opened, and there she was, holding an empty wine glass. "You were walking by," she said, as if she'd been expecting me. "You could hear me." I just knew. She stepped aside without asking if I wanted to come in, and I did, because not walking in felt impossible. The apartment was dim, just the glow from a lamp near the couch. A half-finished bottle of red sat on the coffee table, next to her open notebook. She sank into the corner of the couch and motioned for me to sit. "You ever feel," she began, swirling the wine in her glass, "like you've spent years building walls, and then someone just walks in without knocking?" I thought she meant someone else. But her eyes stayed fixed on mine, and I realized she meant me. "I didn't mean to," I said. "I know," she murmured. "That's why it scares me." Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened around the glass. I should have changed the subject. I should have said something neutral, safe. Instead, I said, "Maybe I didn't knock because I wanted you to open the door." The air between us shifted, heavier, closer. She set the glass down and leaned forward slightly. "You think this is a good idea?" "No," I said honestly. "But I can't stop thinking about you." Her breath caught. It was so quiet I almost missed it. "Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me like that?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just held her gaze, and for a second, it felt like we were both on the edge of something neither of us would be able to take back. She shifted, her knee brushing mine. The contact was small, but it made my chest tighten. We stayed like that, close enough to feel the heat from each other, close enough to see the tiny tremor in her lips. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "If you stay tonight, you can't undo it." Silence stretched. My heart was pounding, but neither of us moved. Finally, she asked the question that tipped everything sideways. "Do you want me to tell you to go, or to stay?" And I couldn't answer, because either way, I knew it would change everything. Her question was still hanging in the air when the sound broke it, a sharp, insistent knocking at the door. She froze. Not the kind of pause you make when you're deciding whether to answer. This was something deeper, tighter, as if her body remembered before her mind could react. "Don't move," she said quietly, and crossed to the door. From the couch, I heard a man's voice, low, familiar enough to her that she didn't ask who it was. "I told you not to come here," she said, her tone clipped but trembling at the edges. "I needed to talk to you. You've been ignoring me." The words were muffled, but the weight behind them wasn't. When she closed the door, she didn't turn right away. She just leaned against it for a second, eyes shut. "You okay?" I asked, standing without meaning to. She opened her eyes slowly. That was my ex-husband. I didn't know what I'd been expecting, but it wasn't that. "He still thinks I'm his to check in on," she said. "Even after the papers, after everything. He has a key. I changed the locks last year." It wasn't just the fact she'd told me, it was how. Like she dropped a piece of herself in my hands and was waiting to see if I'd flinch. "You could have told me," I said quietly. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "And what would you have done with that? Run? Pity me?" I shook my head. "I would have understood more than you think." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in that searching way people have when they're testing if you mean it. "Why do you care?" she asked. The answer came before I could stop it. "Because I see you. Even when you're trying to make sure nobody does." Something in her expression cracked then, subtle, but there. She crossed the space between us, not quickly, but with purpose. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Not unless you mean them." "I do." For a moment, the only sound was our breathing. She stood close enough that I could see the faint scar along her jaw I hadn't noticed before. Then she said, "He's not the only one who's been here before." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Her gaze held mine, steady, unblinking. "We've met. Years ago. You wouldn't remember, you were just a kid." "But I do." I searched her face, trying to pull the memory from the shadows. "What were you doing there?" I asked. Her lips curved, not in a smile, but in something heavier. "Let's just say, you've been in my life longer than you know." And suddenly, I wasn't sure who was chasing who anymore. Her words kept looping in my head, "You've been in my life longer than you know." I sat back down on the couch, needing space, but she didn't take any. She stood in front of me, arms loosely crossed, watching me work through it. "Tell me," I said finally. "It was after my divorce," she began, her voice low. "Your mother used to come into the bookstore where I worked. She brought you with her once. You couldn't have been more than 12. I remember, you asked me where the adventure books were." It was such a small, ordinary memory, but the way she said it, soft, almost fragile, made it feel heavier than it should have. "And you remembered me?" I asked. Her eyes didn't waver. "Yes. You had this way of looking at the shelves, like you wanted to live inside the stories." I didn't know whether to laugh or say something to break the weight between us, but neither felt right. Instead, I said, "And now I'm in yours." Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to speak, then closed again. She sat beside me, close enough that our knees touched. "This shouldn't be happening," she said. I swallowed. "But it is." We stayed there in the quiet, the hum of the fridge filling the space between breaths. I could feel the push and pull in the way her fingers tightened on her knees, like she was holding herself in place. "You scare me," she admitted. "Why?" "Because you see too much." I turned toward her fully. "Then stop hiding from me." Her gaze met mine, steady, unflinching now. And before I could second-guess it, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her palm was warm, trembling slightly against mine. "This isn't a game for me," I said. "I don't care how it looks to anyone else. I don't want to spend another day pretending I'm not thinking about you." Her breath hitched. "Do you know how long it's been since someone said something like that and meant it?" "I mean it," I said. "Every word." She let out a slow exhale, and then her head tilted toward mine, just enough that I could feel the faint brush of her hair against my cheek. "This changes everything," she whispered. "I want it to." And then, without ceremony, her forehead rested lightly against mine. Not a kiss, not yet, but more intimate than one. We stayed there, eyes closed, letting the moment speak louder than anything else could. When she finally pulled back, she didn't let go of my hand. "Then stay," she said simply. And I did. Morning light spilled into her living room, soft and golden, making the empty wine glass on the coffee table look like it belonged to a different night. I was still there. We hadn't crossed every line, but we'd stepped over enough that neither of us could pretend it hadn't happened. She was in the kitchen now, barefoot, pouring coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You don't usually let people stay, do you?" I asked. She shook her head without looking at me. "No," I waited for her to say more, and when she did, her voice was quiet but sure. "But you weren't someone I wanted to send away." Something about that hit deeper than any confession could have. It wasn't just attraction, it was choice. She had let me in, literally and otherwise, and for someone who'd built her life on keeping the door locked, that meant something. Over coffee, she told me about the years after her divorce, the way she'd worked too much, laughed too little, and taught herself not to need anyone. "It worked," she said, "until you started showing up with your stupid ramen and your too honest eyes." I told her I hadn't planned any of it, not helping with the groceries, not staying that first night, not finding myself watching the way she brushed her hair behind her ear. But somewhere between the bags on her counter and the scar on her wrist, I'd stopped wanting to walk away. We didn't make promises. We didn't define what we were or what we'd be. Instead, we agreed on something simpler, that we'd keep showing up. That for now, that was enough. When I left that morning, she walked me to the door. The hallway felt different now, less like a place I passed through and more like a threshold I'd keep returning to. Tomorrow? I asked. She smiled, not wide, but warm, the kind that sticks with you long after you've stopped looking. Tomorrow. As I stepped into the stairwell, I thought about what had really changed. It wasn't that we'd fallen into some reckless, impossible romance. It was that we'd both stopped pretending we didn't need what we'd found in each other, the quiet recognition, the sense of being seen without having to explain every scar. Maybe the point wasn't about how right or wrong it looked to the outside world. Maybe it was about finding the person who feels like a safe place to land, even when the rest of your life is unsteady. And for the first time in a long while, I wanted to see what tomorrow could be.